A lot of people are scared of getting outside. They've never been outside. They've never been barefoot, but that's what Turtle Island is.
A man who seemed indestructible has been broken by things no wilderness ever prepared him for. Eustace Conway, star of Mountain Men, founder of Turtle Island, and once hailed as the last American man, built a life that defied modern society. But behind the legend is a story most people don't know. What forced him to question everything he believed in? How did legal battles, personal loss, and isolation slowly unravel a life that looked bulletproof on the surface? And why is the man who once claimed he would save the world now quietly stepping back? In this deep dive, we uncover the emotional collapse behind the camera, the pain, pressure, and solitude that changed Eustace Conway forever. Building a legend in the woods. Eustace Conway didn't just talk about freedom, he lived it. At the age of 17, while most teenagers were struggling with high school and figuring out their futures, Conway walked away from the modern world. He left his suburban home in South Carolina, strapped on handmade gear, and stepped into the wild with nothing but conviction. He made his home in a teepee, lived off the land, and began crafting a life that few today could even imagine. No cell phones, no running water, no safety nets. He wasn't playing survival. He was practicing it every single day. For the next 3 decades, Eustace would build what many considered an impossible dream. A working primitive preserve called Turtle Island, located deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It wasn't a gimmick. It wasn't nostalgia. He saw it as a mission to reconnect people to the roots they'd forgotten. The kind of roots that teach you how to grow your own food, build your own shelter, and rely on your own hands. Conway didn't just want to live this way, he wanted to show others how to do it too. And he did, through camps, workshops, and by opening Turtle Island to people from all walks of life. Long before reality television found him, Eustace Conway had already become something of a legend. His adventures were the stuff of folklore. He claimed to have ridden a horse across the United States, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, in just over 100 days. While some questioned the accuracy of his timelines, especially compared to the Abernathy brothers' famous journey in 1911, there was no denying the intensity of Conway's willpower. His story was profiled on This American Life, and Elizabeth Gilbert wrote an entire book about him titled The Last American Man. He became known as the man who wasn't just rejecting the modern world, he was actively building an alternative to it. And then there was his time on the Appalachian Trail. Conway hiked the entire route, over 2,000 miles long, adding another epic to his growing legend. But perhaps what made his story so magnetic was the fact that it wasn't about conquest. It was about connection. He didn't hike or ride to beat a record or prove a point. He did it to understand something deeper about himself and the natural world. His philosophy wasn't about escaping responsibility, but redefining it, living with the land, not just on it. He didn't believe in comfort zones. He believed in resilience. One story often told about Conway involved slicing his thumb open during a work session. Instead of running to a hospital, he used plant medicine and stitched the wound shut himself. 12 stitches in total. That moment alone said everything about how he lived. Pain didn't deter him. Discomfort wasn't the enemy. In fact, it was often the teacher. But Eustace Conway was more than just a survivalist or a hermit with a mission. He was a teacher, a speaker, and a man who could command a room without ever raising his voice. Whether he was explaining how to bend bark into a basket or talking about ancient hunting techniques, people listened. Not because he was flashy, but because he was real. he had what so many people today are missing: purpose. And that purpose radiated from everything he touched. The deeper irony, though, is that this man who built his life away from civilization would one day be pulled back into it, under a spotlight he never fully trusted. The life he built so carefully, so quietly, would soon be exposed to millions, and not all of them would approve of what they saw. But the man who seemed to need no one would eventually face a fight he couldn't win alone. The show that changed everything. For a man who distrusted modernity and technology, it was a strange decision. Eustace Conway agreed to appear on a reality television show. Mountain Men, which premiered on the History Channel in May 2012, was supposed to spotlight rugged individuals who lived off the land. It promised authenticity, grit, and the kind of connection to nature that most people had long forgotten. But for Conway, it became a turning point, a double-edged sword that brought both opportunity and heartbreak. Initially, the show seemed like the perfect platform. Viewers were introduced to three men: Marty Maiorato in Alaska, Tom Orr in Montana, and Eustace Conway in North Carolina. Each had carved out a unique lifestyle away from the convenience and chaos of modern life. But Conway stood apart. Unlike the others who lived in remote cabins or hunted for survival, he had built an entire preserve, Turtle Island, a living, breathing educational center where people could learn to reconnect with the earth and with themselves. The camera followed Conway as he trained animals, split firewood, and worked tirelessly to prepare for winter. It captured him as he built log cabins from scratch, raised food, and mentored young apprentices. His philosophy wasn't just about survival, it was about stewardship. He wasn't trying to escape civilization. He was trying to teach people how to live in harmony with the land. For the first time, millions of people saw a man who still lived by the old ways, and many were inspired. Conway had become a symbol of something deeply lost in American culture. But fame came at a cost. Conway always believed television was a toxic force. In one unaired moment caught between takes, he reportedly turned to the camera and said, "Turn off your television. Go outside." Those words never made it into the show, of course, because while Mountain Men was marketed as a documentary of sorts, it was still reality TV, driven by drama, tension, and simplified storylines. The nuance of Eustace's message was flattened into entertainment, and with visibility came scrutiny. Local officials, who had barely noticed Turtle Island before, began asking questions. In one episode, Eustace receives a legal notice in the mail. With his usual quiet determination, he opens the letter with a pocket knife and reads it aloud. "Motion to claim exempt property." His face darkens. In that moment, the show's narration spells out what many viewers already feared. Conway wasn't just fighting nature anymore, he was fighting the system. It was no longer a survival story. It was a battle to keep his life's work intact. Behind the scenes, Conway struggled with how he was being portrayed. While the exposure helped keep Turtle Island financially afloat, it also brought unexpected consequences. Permits, codes, legal battles. Inspectors arrived. Documents were filed. Suddenly, the man who had spent decades building a world outside the grid found himself trapped in it. His simple structures were declared unsafe. His cabins, barns, and workshops, built by hand with traditional methods, were now violations of modern building standards. And there was no going back. Despite his growing unease with the cameras, Conway continued filming. Why? Because the show had become a lifeline. Turtle Island needed the income. The apprentices, the animals, the land itself all relied on public interest and financial support. Eustace was caught in a cruel paradox. To preserve the preserve, he had to engage with the very world he had long rejected. He told Wilbar in 2021, "I thought it might be easier to change a few old houses than change the whole world. Still have the high expectations for both." Conway had begun flipping homes near Boone, still teaching and building, but also retreating. His appearances on Mountain Men became symbolic of a deeper tension in his life, the balance between staying true to his ideals and surviving in a world that no longer made space for them. What started as a lifeline for Turtle Island would soon become the very thing that nearly destroyed it. When the system came knocking. It started with a quiet knock, one that would echo across the life Eustace Conway had spent decades building. On June 27, 2013, Conway lay resting on a wooden sled outside his barn at Turtle Island, not knowing that county officials were about to unravel his sanctuary. They cited dozens of building code violations, essentially declaring his life's work illegal. After 26 years of living in harmony with the land, teaching thousands how to build, forage, and survive, Eustace suddenly found himself labeled a danger. The inspectors combed through the preserve with clipboards in hand. They noted that the cabins and shelters, crafted with hand-hewn logs, mud, and stone, lacked modern permits. There were no stamped lumber grades, no conventional plumbing systems, and no certified electrical lines. Some structures weren't bolted to their stone foundations. Outhouses were considered unapproved, and even the micro-hydroelectric setup created by Appalachian State students was deemed unsafe. In all, a consultant documented 78 pages of violations. The choice he was given? Tear down the buildings, bring them up to modern standards, or shut it all down. To Conway, those options were absurd. How do you teach ancient living in a structure designed by modern code books? "You don't learn survival skills in an air-conditioned room," he said. His philosophy was rooted in something much deeper than convenience. It was about honoring tradition, building with intention, and learning by doing. Every crack in the walls and every hand-split shingle had a lesson baked into it. Yet now, that philosophy was at odds with bureaucratic language and building permits. Worse, Eustace believed this storm wasn't entirely natural. It was man-made and triggered by the very thing that was supposed to help him: the popularity of Mountain Men. Before the cameras, no one had questioned how he lived. But when his life became entertainment, it drew attention. In fact, the county's planning director admitted that someone had mailed in detailed maps of Turtle Island, symbols, wiring diagrams, building layouts. Someone had been watching. Eustace went from living in peace to being targeted. One of the most jarring moments came in the show's second episode. Eustace pulled out a letter from his mailbox, his hands rough, steady, and opened it with his knife. "Motion to claim exempt property," he read aloud. He looked into the camera and said, "Basically, I just got a message saying, 'Your life is over.'" Viewers watched, perhaps unaware that this wasn't just scripted drama. It was real life crumbling. To many, it felt like the system was trying to crush a way of life that had survived for thousands of years. Conway himself wondered how, in modern America, a man could be told he wasn't allowed to build with wood from his own land or live in a house he created with his bare hands. It wasn't just about codes, it was about control. "People have been building their shelters for thousands of years," he said. "So how did it come to this?" Despite the blow, Conway didn't back down quietly. He posted interviews with building experts like Drew Kelly, who inspected the structures and declared them safe, even superior in some ways to modern minimum standards. Conway's supporters flooded the county office with letters. Some compared the crackdown to Soviet-style control. Lawmakers took notice. Eventually, a bill was passed in North Carolina to exempt primitive camps like Turtle Island from many of the codes in question. The preserve reopened, but the damage was already done. But the deeper tragedy wasn't just red tape. It was the mounting pressure on a man who had always worked alone. Lawsuits, loss, and legal nightmares. As if dealing with the government's building code crackdown weren't enough, another storm was brewing, one even more personal and devastating. In 2005, Turtle Island hosted a retreat for a group of North Carolina teaching fellows. What should have been an inspiring weekend turned tragic in an instant. During a simple demonstration, a staff member showed how to use a sling to hurl a stone, a primitive hunting technique. But something went horribly wrong. The stone launched backward and struck a woman named Kimberly Baker in the face, blinding her in one eye. What followed was a legal nightmare that would drag on for years and cost Eustace Conway more than just money. 2 staff members reached settlements with Baker totaling $400,000. Later, Eustace himself agreed to a separate mediated settlement of $75,000. But even that didn't go smoothly. Part of the deal involved mortgaging a portion of Turtle Island to help cover the payment. When Conway missed the deadline, Baker filed a second lawsuit for breach of contract. The financial weight was crushing. Every dollar owed chipped away at the land he'd spent decades preserving. And all of it was unfolding while the world watched him on national television. For a man who had once crossed the continent on horseback, who stitched his own wounds with bark and sinew, who believed in living off what the earth provided, the idea of lawyers and courtrooms felt foreign and deeply invasive. Conway was never a businessman. He was a builder, a teacher, a preservationist. But the lawsuits demanded a different kind of resilience, one that wasn't carved from trees or stone, but paper, deadlines, and mounting stress. These weren't the kinds of battles you could fight with firewood or a handsaw. Even more painful was the symbolism of it all. He had created Turtle Island as a safe haven, a place where people could reconnect with the old ways, live intentionally, and escape the noise of the modern world. Now that same dream had become the target of legal arguments, settlements, and threats of seizure. The lawsuits didn't just hurt Turtle Island's finances, they threatened its soul. And as all this unfolded, the Mountain Men cameras kept rolling. Season after season, viewers watched Eustace chop wood, train horses, and teach apprentices, unaware that behind the scenes he was scrambling to keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. Each episode portrayed him as the wise, unshakable mountain man. But in real life, he was fielding lawsuits, negotiating settlements, and trying to navigate a legal system that seemed stacked against everything he believed in. The financial strain seeped into every corner of his life. Turtle Island was always a labor of love, not a cash machine. It depended on donations, volunteers, and paying campers. But legal fees, debt payments, and repairs were unrelenting. He began to rely even more on the income and visibility from Mountain Men, despite his distrust of television and its distortions. He once admitted that reality TV thrives on drama and tension, even if it comes at the expense of truth. Still, he stayed in front of the camera, not because he wanted fame, but because he needed to keep Turtle Island alive. Through it all, Conway continued to teach and host camps. He didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. But those years carved a new kind of exhaustion into him, one that no herbal poultice or campfire wisdom could heal. He started aging visibly, thinner, wearier, more guarded. The emotional and financial pressure bled into his relationships with staff, friends, and students. Some left, some stayed. But something had shifted in Eustace. Something deeper than survival was now at stake. Yet all of that would pale in comparison to the loss of one man, the friend who helped him build it all. The death of Preston Roberts. Of all the trials Eustace Conway faced, lawsuits, red tape, national scrutiny, none cut deeper than the loss of Preston Roberts. Preston wasn't just a co-star on Mountain Men or another set of capable hands on Turtle Island. He was Eustace's right hand, his closest friend, his emotional ballast in a life built on isolation, sacrifice, and hard-won purpose. Their bond ran far deeper than survivalist skills or shared projects. It was a kind of brotherhood forged over decades, through thousands of hours spent building, teaching, and dreaming together. Preston was the one person who truly understood the mission of Turtle Island. He didn't just support the vision, he lived it. Together, they constructed buildings with hand-split logs, taught apprentices, and passed on ancient knowledge to a new generation. He had a presence that grounded the place. Where Eustace was intensity and fire, Preston was calm and steel. He could command a group with quiet strength, whether he was teaching knife skills, leading a sweat lodge ceremony, or simply offering a story by the fire. His wisdom was practical, but also soulful, rooted in his years as a teacher, father, and steward of the land. When Preston began to feel ill in 2017, no one expected what came next. In a matter of weeks, doctors discovered an inoperable tumor on his liver. The tumor was large, aggressive, and beyond the reach of surgery. The diagnosis came like a lightning strike, sudden, shocking, final. There was no time to fight, no time to rally the community, to gather herbs, to retreat to the woods for healing. Just 3 weeks later, Preston was gone. Eustace was shattered. In a public tribute, he called Preston the most sincere man he had ever known. He spoke of Preston's generosity, his love for his wife Kathleen, and the profound kindness he offered to everyone who crossed his path. He wasn't just a man of the mountains, he was the heart of Turtle Island. And when he died, something vital disappeared with him. The buildings still stood, the trees still rustled in the wind, but the energy shifted. A stillness took hold that wasn't peace, it was absence. Eustace described it as a chasm, a word that evokes not just loss, but a vast, unbridgeable space. Preston's absence wasn't a wound that could be patched. It was a tear in the fabric of the preserve. Visitors could feel it. Interns whispered about it. Even the horses seemed quieter. For Eustace, the grief wasn't just personal. It was spiritual. The man who had walked every step of the journey with him was no longer there to shoulder the burden, to help hold the vision steady when everything else threatened to fall apart. And Eustace had no one left to lean on. That was the cruel twist. Just when he most needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what it meant to live outside the world's expectations, to build something out of nothing, to keep going despite the storms, Preston was gone. The timing couldn't have been worse. Turtle Island was still reeling from legal threats. Conway was still fighting to protect his land, and the emotional exhaustion of decades of labor was beginning to wear down even his iron resolve. Without Preston, the mountain man began to look more like a lone man, and the isolation was sharper than ever. Preston's grave lies not far from Turtle Island, surrounded by thick forest and quiet trails. People still leave feathers, carved stones, and handwritten notes there. His presence lingers in the cabins he helped build, in the lessons he taught, in the faces of those who remember. But for Eustace, the reality is simpler and heavier. The friend he trusted most is no longer beside him. And as grief gave way to exhaustion, Conway faced a new battle, one against time, legacy, and a future no longer shared. Cracks in the dream. For over 3 decades, Eustace Conway pushed his body, mind, and spirit to sustain a vision few others dared to dream. He built Turtle Island Preserve from the ground up, hauling logs, raising barns, teaching hundreds of students how to live off the land, and fighting modern systems that threatened it all. But even legends have limits, and eventually, even the last American man began to crack under the weight of his own creation. By the early 2020s, Conway started pulling back. He wasn't on the preserve every day anymore. He wasn't hauling firewood from sunup to sundown. He wasn't leading classes or overseeing every campfire. He cited exhaustion, deep, unrelenting exhaustion. After years of waking before dawn, working through every season without rest, and skipping basic comforts like food or sleep, his body had simply begun to revolt. The labor had caught up with him. So had the loneliness. The emotional weight of losing Preston Roberts, enduring lawsuits, fighting inspectors, and holding on to a vision that felt increasingly misunderstood had left him drained. He likened the toll of Turtle Island to post-traumatic stress. "If I kept going," he said in one interview, "the stress would have slain me, not figuratively, literally." And so, in what felt like a reluctant act of self-preservation, he tried to loosen his grip. He stopped showing up every day. He experimented with the idea of weekends off. He tried, for the first time, to let others lead. But here's where the dream began to falter again. Finding someone to carry the torch proved harder than he imagined. Conway had spent his life demanding the impossible of himself. Unrelenting standards, ceaseless work, absolute control. And knowingly or not, he expected the same from anyone who stepped onto Turtle Island to help. Apprentice after apprentice arrived, hoping to learn from the master. But few lasted. Fewer still were considered capable enough to continue the mission. Those who showed promise often buckled under the pressure of his demanding oversight. Conway remained involved in every detail, requiring constant updates, approvals for even minor changes, and often dismissing modern methods as incompatible with the Turtle Island philosophy. His vision was pure, but his leadership style was uncompromising. One former worker described it bluntly: "There's more red tape at Turtle Island than at your local government office." It was a tragic irony. The man who once railed against bureaucracy had created his own kind of fortress. He wanted someone to take the burden off his shoulders, but struggled to trust anyone enough to let go. This became a repeating cycle. Promising leaders would emerge, only to disappear months later. Plans for succession would form, only to collapse under the weight of Conway's expectations. Yet not everyone walked away. Desiree, a longtime contributor to the preserve, remained. For over 15 years, she had supported Conway's efforts, juggling both operations and the emotional strain of trying to help the dream survive. Even Eustace admitted that without her, Turtle Island wouldn't still be functioning. She's doing the work. She's held the place together. But the burden is immense, and she's only one person. The tragedy is clear even to those closest to him. Turtle Island's future depends on Conway letting go, on trusting the very community he always said he was building. But so far, he hasn't. His identity is so deeply entangled with the land that separating himself from it feels like a kind of death. To walk away would mean surrendering the purpose that's defined every waking hour since he was 17 years old. And that's the heartbreak that cuts the deepest. Not in what Conway has lost, but in what he still cannot bring himself to give away. The curse of the last American man. There was a time when Eustace Conway believed he could save the world. Not metaphorically. He truly believed it. He thought that by showing people how to live simply, honestly, and close to nature, he could reverse the damage done by modern life. That belief drove him to create Turtle Island. It drove him to sleep on the forest floor, to train his body like a machine, to build homes without nails, and to dedicate his every breath to a cause most people barely understood. But somewhere along the way, even Conway began to admit the truth. "I'm failing," he said, reflecting on decades of effort. The systems he tried to escape had only grown stronger. The culture he challenged had pushed back. People came and went. The world moved on. And even Turtle Island, for all its symbolic power, seemed like a flickering candle against the wind. He once imagined a revolution. Now he wonders if modernity has already won. That realization cuts deeper than most people will ever know, because it isn't just about a mission. It's about a man who has spent most of his life alone in the woods, a man who, despite his public persona as the rugged mountain survivor, carries a heavy, quiet loneliness beneath it all. For all the students he's mentored, all the viewers who've watched him on Mountain Men, and all the lives he's touched through Turtle Island, Eustace Conway never built a family of his own. He never married. He never had children. And now, as he enters the final chapters of his life, he faces the one challenge no blade or fire-starting stone can solve: the absence of an heir. Not just for the land, but for the life he tried to model. His attempts at finding a successor have failed. His control, his standards, his vision, none of it has translated to a clear path forward. But even in the face of that, he hasn't stopped. Instead of giving up, Eustace has shifted. He spends more time restoring houses now, old structures near Boone that he renovates and rents. He sees it as a continuation of the same mission, only more manageable. These homes, too, are classrooms. He brings in young workers, shows them how to build, how to care, how to connect to something real. He tells them stories. He mentors them. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he still hopes one of them might be the one who understands, the one who can carry it all forward. And sometimes, it almost seems like he's made peace with what's slipping through his fingers. Other times, the fight is still there in his eyes. He talks of those rare conversations with old souls, people who call him after watching the show, strangers who somehow understand him. He clings to those moments. They remind him that maybe he isn't alone, that maybe, just maybe, the dream still matters. But what he hasn't yet found is the freedom to stop fighting. For a man like Eustace Conway, who has lived by conviction, who has refused to bend, peace may only come when he's no longer trying to save the entire world, but simply the soul of it. When the battle becomes less about proving something to others, and more about protecting what's left for himself, and those who still choose to walk his path. If Eustace Conway's story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the world he's built and the battles he's still fighting? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen for more stories about the untold lives behind American legends.